The Clothes Have No Emperor. A brief summary written and narrated by Ian Purdy. Copyright 2026. This summary is designed to act as an index to make it easier to find specific topics in the 6 parts that constitute The Clothes Have No Emperor, an audiobook that is available free of charge on YouTube. The Clothes Have No Emperor consists of over 7 hours of recordings that examine in forensic detail, illustrating and justifying the contentions it presents. This summary is designed to make it easier to access specific sections for more detailed elaboration. Also, I hope you enjoy the scenic background shot at Port Dickson in Malaysia. But before I present the index, here is a brief synopsis of The Clothes Have No Emperor. Jesus of Nazareth's real name was Yeshua. His family tomb was discovered at a place called Talpiot during excavations for a new suburb near Jerusalem in 1980. Inside the tomb were included the bones of Yeshua, his mother, his wife, 3 of his brothers, 2 of whom are mentioned in the Bible, and his son. The remains were all inside ossuaries or limestone bone boxes, a burial custom that only persisted for about 100 years and therefore indisputably dates them to the 1st century. Yeshua's ossuary was marked Yeshua bar Yehoseph, which has been translated down through the ages as Jesus, son of Joseph. This momentous discovery was authenticated by renowned archaeologist Simcha Jacobovici in the first decade of the 21st century and is the subject of a full-feature documentary by renowned historical filmmaker James Cameron entitled The Lost Tomb of Jesus. The Talpiot tomb proves that almost everything written and spoken about Jesus is Iron Age fiction. It provides sound physical DNA evidence that Yeshua was a human male who had a wife, Mariamne, referred to as Mary Magdalene in the Bible, and a son called Judah, who is also recorded in the Bible as the beloved disciple and was known as Didymus Judah Thomas, the author of the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas. Yeshua survived the 6 hours he spent nailed to the cross, and, with his wife Mariamne, he fled to Greece, where he posed as her brother and assumed the alias Philip. This name was derived from the Greek Philippos, which means lover of horses. From there, they traveled to France and finally returned to Israel when it was safe for them to do so. Records exist at Hemis Monastery in Ladakh, Kashmir, in northern India that provide credible, detailed accounts of Yeshua's travels to India and Tibet during the 18 years that are absent from the Bible. There are also records in the library of the Potala Palace in Lhasa, Tibet, but due to the Chinese occupation, the Tibetan documents are not currently accessible. During these 18 years, Yeshua studied Eastern spiritual traditions and became a revered tantric master. Using the pseudonym Philip, Yeshua wrote the Gospel of Philip, which was preserved by the Gnostics and resurfaced with the Gospel of Thomas in 1945 in what is now referred to as the Nag Hammadi Library. Both of these Gospels are treatises on Buddhist Tantra. No other plausible explanation exists for the multiple references to the bridal chamber, which corresponds with the Tibetan Buddhist term Yab Yum. Tantra uses sexual imagery to describe the processes through which enlightenment is attained, and this has led to the modern misconception of tantric sex that has absolutely nothing to do with the sacred supramundane process. Both of these Gospels also contain stark references to reincarnation and meditation, which are foundational Buddhist principles that do not exist anywhere in Christianity. Part 1. An Atheist Biography of Jesus of Nazareth. This begins with a general introduction which lists the main sources that led to the hypotheses contained within The Clothes Have No Emperor. It sets the tone for the rest of the work by concluding that Christianity is a fake, composite religion with very limited spiritual value. In the beginning presents an analysis of the improbability of the Christian version of Yeshua's birth, which most scholars agree occurred sometime between the years 8 to 4 BCE. It details some of the prophecies upon which this fictional account is based. Growing Up presents a summary of the biblical and Quranic accounts of Yeshua's childhood. The next section, Saint Issa in India, steps away from the Christian narrative and describes Yeshua's documented travels to India and Tibet. Credible texts preserved at Hemis Monastery in Ladakh, Kashmir, in northern India, reveal that Yeshua traveled to India during the 18 years that are absent from the Bible. He studied Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, and Zoroastrianism, and emerged as an accomplished spiritual master. When he returned to Israel and attempted to educate his fellow Jews, his teachings were rejected by Orthodox Jews because they are antithetical to the ancient beliefs enshrined in Judaism. The creation of the Gospels of the New Testament delves into the historically verifiable fact that all of these texts were written by anonymous Greek scholars and were specifically tailored to advance the contemporary political needs of the decaying Roman Empire. The four synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, can at best be described as historically dubious. Next, the outlaw cult of Jesus reveals that Yeshua was a charismatic leader and an accomplished healer, and describes the recruitment of his disciples. Jesus Takes the Show on the Road is a modern interpretation of the biblical presentation of the 3 years of Yeshua's ministry. It describes why his unique talents made him too popular and how, in the suppressed, conquered first-century Jewish culture, he became an inconvenient impediment to Roman rule. When he was heralded as the King of the Jews, he became a political threat, and for that he was crucified. The crucifixion is well documented in all four synoptic Gospels. Though the accounts differ considerably, all four agree that Yeshua was only on the cross for approximately 6 hours, which is not long enough to kill an otherwise healthy 30 to 35-year-old man. Crucifixion is one of the slowest, most torturous forms of execution and usually takes several days to eventually put its victims to death. They die of asphyxiation after they become too weak to hold themselves up and their lungs collapse. This process can be accelerated by breaking a victim's legs, which was the fate of the 2 thieves nailed up beside him. However, as was heavily prophesied, Yeshua's legs were not broken. He also suffered a spear wound to his side, but he bled, further evidence that he was still alive, because once the heart stops beating, there is no blood pressure, so corpses do not bleed. He survived, possibly aided by a hefty bribe paid by his wealthy uncle, Joseph of Arimathea, to the corrupt Roman governor Pontius Pilate, who had sentenced him to death. These most unimaginably agonized, humiliated hours of his life, which according to the varying accounts in the synoptic Gospels were witnessed by his wife, his mother, some of his sisters, and his son, became the logo for the relic of Roman brutality that we know today as the Christian Church. This is the symbol they have chosen to represent the thinly veiled threat of the magnitude of suffering that will be unleashed by their loving God upon anybody who dares to not accept their dodgy dogma. The resurrection was first introduced by the Apostle Paul and had many precedents in the ancient world. By the 1st century, it was a well-established method of demonstrating the credentials of deity. When somebody reappears as a living individual after they've been declared deceased, the rational conclusion is that they somehow survived. Christians, however, are required to suspend their intelligence and reason and believe in Yeshua's miraculous resurrection. They are also required to believe that he was able to regularly suspend the laws of nature to perform miracles or feats of magic, and that his mother was a virgin. The resurrected. After surviving the crucifixion, Yeshua and Mariamne fled to Greece, where he assumed the alias Philip and posed as his wife's brother. The Apostle Philip was then mysteriously crucified, conveniently erasing him from the narrative, but leaving the awkward question of where, when, and how he was able to author the incredibly unique, inexplicably tantric, Gnostic Gospel of Philip. From there, they travelled to France before finally returning to Israel, where they lived out their final years and were buried together with other family members in the Talpiot tomb. St. Paul the Apostle was miraculously converted on the road to Damascus, where he was on his way to denounce Yeshua, having previously personally stoned to death one of Yeshua's followers, a man called Stephen. But then suddenly, somehow, he became one of the founders of Roman Christianity. All of this can only be rationally explained by a chance meeting with the actual living person of Yeshua and the development of a strong personal relationship. Saul of Tarsus, who through this irrationally presented biblical process somehow became the Apostle Paul, was an educated Roman citizen from a wealthy family. He was responsible for what became Christian theology, which he drew from well-established precedents that permeated Roman pagan beliefs. Yeshua's family. This section deals comprehensively with the game-changing discovery of the Talpiot tomb, a detailed analysis of its contents, and what it means for the future of Christianity. Actual physical evidence that disproves almost everything the Church claims about the life and significance of Yeshua is anathema to the entire edifice of Christian faith. Naturally, the Church continues to do everything in its power to discredit and suppress the most significant archaeological discovery of the 20th century. This section also includes evidence that Yeshua and Mariamne had several children, but most notably their son Judah, whose remains were found in the Talpiot tomb. He was also known as Didymus Judah Thomas and was the author of the Gospel of Thomas, which is a list of 114 sayings that were direct quotes from his father. Mariamne Mara was the name written on the ossuary containing the remains of Yeshua's wife, the woman Christians have denigrated throughout history and who is referred to as Mary Magdalene in the Bible. Every other surviving text describes her as a highly accomplished spiritual master, unrecognizable from the Christian prostitute proclaimed by Pope Gregory I in 591 AD. Part 2. How the Romans Stole Jesus. This part begins with a section on the Romans that details the historical fact that everybody who grew up in first century Rome was suffering from acute lead poisoning. This was a result of the lead pipes, which were one of the features of their otherwise sophisticated water supply. They also used lead to sweeten their wine and in some of their medicines. To this day, there is no cure for lead poisoning, which is a permanent condition that doesn't diminish over time. It causes a lack of empathy and compassion, excessive cruelty, and a low IQ, all well-documented features of Roman society. The Romans were violent psychopaths. The section after the crucifixion traces how the Jesus movement went underground, but survived in the form of a number of sects, including the Gnostics, the Essenes, and the Judeo-Christians, all of whom had their own literature and practices derived from direct contact with Yeshua. In the 4th century, the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great, through a gradual process of development that only reached full culmination long after his death, is credited with converting the Romans to his version of Christianity. He created a new religion, first to unite the troops of his army, and then, once he'd conquered it, the rest of the Roman Empire. His soldiers were adherents of 3 contemporary religions. Firstly, sun worshippers like Constantine himself, and secondly, followers of the 2nd century BC prophet Mithra, and finally, adherents of early Christianity. Constantine combined aspects of these 3 religions to create a new hybrid faith that utilized the holidays and ceremonies of Mithra, who was born on December the 25th and was believed to have died, then rose from the dead after 3 days. Yeshua was chosen as the front man, coming from the ancient Jewish tradition, which had a long recorded history rich with unfulfilled prophecies. The ancient texts from his Jewish heritage provided the entire Old Testament, which was artlessly deployed to preface the Holy Bible, thereby avoiding the need to waste time or money on further concoction. And finally, Constantine incorporated aspects of his own religious beliefs, which revered the sun god Sol Invictus or Apollo, depending on where you got your translation. The fact that Roman Christians still go to church on Sunday shows that Constantine remained a sun-worshipping pagan until the end of his life. The Roman Empire may have officially fallen, but the persistence of the Roman Church into the 21st century means that it is still controlling the minds of an enormous percentage of the population and continues to exert its ancient, pernicious influence to this day. The Council of Nicaea. The new hybrid religion was adapted and refined by several ecumenical councils of bishops or junkets of highly influential, wealthy individuals who enjoyed the patronage of their emperor. The first, the Council of Nicaea, was attended by Constantine himself and was convened to legitimize and fine-tune his new faith. Roman emperors claimed to be divine, so therefore Jesus also needed to be a god or the Son of God to have any credibility in their lead-poisoned psychopathic society. The first thing this committee of pampered buffoons did was to declare that the Gnostics were heretics, and they became the first victims of Christian holy war. All other literature and sources relating to Yeshua's life were banned and ruthlessly eliminated. Various heirs to Constantine's title over several subsequent centuries further eroded what had remained of Yeshua's actual spiritual legacy, replacing his wisdom with blind faith in doctrinal absurdity. The two most notable of these, the First Council of Constantinople and the Second Council of Constantinople, were responsible for the descent of the Christian religion into spiritual dementia. It stopped being a tool for empowerment and hope and became a suppressive intellectual straitjacket. The section "It was all plagiarism" reveals many of the earlier sources of key Christian beliefs, including the resurrection, the virgin birth, and miracles. The immediate result of this corrupted, politically motivated doctrine was a 1,000-year period known as the Dark Ages, which were characterized by ignorance, repression, and fear. This section details some of the outrageous, obscene perversions and corruption indulged in by popes during this tragic stain on European history. The next section on the Crusades summarizes the demented barbarity unleashed in Jesus' name in multiple futile attempts to retake the Holy Land from the newly arisen faith of Islam and the historical reasons behind it. The Knights Templar were the most feared fighting force of the Crusades and occupied Jerusalem for over 100 years. Compelling evidence was found in the Talpiot tomb that suggests they discovered it and may have removed relics which constituted a threat to Christian dogma. This could have been one of the reasons behind their sudden grisly demise, ordered by Pope Clement V and carried out by King Philip IV of France in 1307 AD. The Spanish Inquisition is yet another outrageous historical atrocity, the barely conceivable details of which are painfully described in this section. The conquistadors spread Roman Christianity into the Americas with a genocidal efficiency that has ensured they are still despised by the surviving peoples they conquered. Protestantism was a sad demonstration of the thoroughness of Christian indoctrination. It had rendered its victims incapable of developing an independent, spiritually significant alternative to the well-established abuses of the Roman Church against which they lamely attempted to rebel. The disappointing result was a diluted version of the same corrupted nonsense, with the Roman Bible remaining their central text. The age of discovery spread all this intolerance and bigotry to the four corners of the earth. Aided by their utilization of gunpowder and horses, the European Christians conquered the world and wiped out any cultures that had established a meaningful connection with the earth and reality, and replaced them with blind faith in an imaginary Superman in the sky, which they called God and credited with the creation of the universe. Failing to worship this apparition resulted in the destruction of many spiritually evolved civilizations, effectively deleting most of humanity's genuine spiritual traditions, which were replaced by enforced blind faith in spiritual absurdities. Part 3. Yeshua's Message to the World. This part unscrambles the omelette of Christianity. It begins with a chapter on the art of translation. No two translations are ever identical, being the result of the preconceived beliefs and linguistic limitations of their translators. This section contains quotes from renowned biblical translator Mauro Biglino, who was an official biblical translator for the Vatican until he refused to substitute the word God for the word Elohim. Elohim is the word used to describe the divinity represented in the original Hebrew scriptures of the Old Testament, and it is a plural. Biglino was fired by the Vatican when he refused to substitute the singular word God. All of the synoptic Gospels were translated many times, firstly from the original Greek into Latin, and then into almost every other language on earth. This was accomplished by dedicated pious monks who believed they were doing God's work, and this has had an enormous impact on modern versions of the Bible. The Gospel of Philip is a remarkable document. It has also fallen victim to mistranslation, but not to anywhere near the degree of misrepresentation enshrined in the pre-corrupted synoptic Gospels. Before he died, Yeshua, using the pseudonym Philip, wrote the Gospel of Philip, which was preserved by the Gnostics and was discovered in 1945 amongst other early Christian texts that are now collectively known as the Nag Hammadi Library. Also included was a book of 114 of Yeshua's sayings, the Gospel of Thomas, which, as mentioned above, were recorded by his son Judah, or Didymus Judah Thomas. The Gospels of Philip and Thomas provide the as yet unadjudicated proof that Yeshua was a Buddhist tantric master. They contain nothing that pertains to the modern Christian religion and are clearly and demonstrably treatises on Buddhist Tantra, a fact that is obvious to any modern tantric practitioners. The correspondence between Yeshua's repeated enunciation of the bridal chamber, a central theme of the Gospel of Philip, and the Tibetan ideal of Yab Yum constitutes the only rational interpretation of this core concept. It is inside the bridal chamber that the sacred male, method, is united with the sacred female, wisdom, to attain enlightenment. The bridal chamber is not included in any of the other Nag Hammadi literature, but appears in both the Gospels of Philip and Thomas, indelibly linking them to Yeshua and Buddhist Tantra. Tantra did not exist in the Roman Empire and is exclusive to Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, and the ancient Tibetan Bon religion. It is taught through a process of initiation, and initiates take a vow of secrecy. Yeshua was the only person within the Roman Empire at that time who could possibly have qualified to be considered a tantric master. He is the only possible source of the tantric references found in these two authentic 2nd century Gnostic texts. Also included in the Gospel of Philip are clear, unambiguous references to rebirth and meditation. These also exist in the Gospel of Thomas, but have been rendered less obvious by mistranslation. So to put it in modern terminology, Jesus was a Buddhist. Most of the actual quotes attributed to Jesus in the Bible are clear expressions of the law of karma. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you cannot be interpreted in any other way. Also, love thy neighbor as thyself and love thy enemies aren't just contrary to the Judaism of Elijah and Moses recorded in the Old Testament, but are unequivocally Buddhist. The reality expounded by Yeshua is the Buddhist Gnostic ideal of our personal divinity buried deep inside our corrupted minds. The main impediment to restoring our connection with this ultimate reality is our egos, an imaginary aspect of mind based on the erroneous concept of a separately existing self-entity which we recreate lifetime after lifetime. The section decoding the Bible attempts to retranslate the Christian Trinity of God, Father, and Son into aspects of mind, the ground luminosity, Rigpa, and Sem, which form the basis of Tibetan Buddhism. The section on virtue defines morality and ethics and explains why they are central to successful mind training. And finally, the section on wisdom attempts to reveal its spiritual significance and relationship to the teachings of Yeshua contained in the Bible and the Gospels of Philip and Thomas. Part 4. The Consequences in Our Modern World describes the results of the corrupted Christian doctrine being forced into the minds of modern humanity. It begins with a section on science and how our world is being destroyed through this spin-off religion, the idiot bastard child of the closed-down Christian mind. It describes how our survival as a species is under threat while we expect God to save us from the results of our ignorance simply because we believe He will. Life in the 21st century attempts to show that many people, including some of the most powerful and influential, live in a spiritually deprived world where greed and selfishness are not only accepted as natural, but are admired. It documents the tragic fact that every denomination of Christianity on every continent was revealed to be riddled with pedophilia in the latter half of the 20th century. This is yet another symptom of a corrupted doctrine that does not represent the true teachings and message of the Master Yeshua. Apocalyptic Proclivities develops these themes, describing how nothing in our reality exists independently of the whole. We are not separate, but are an integral part of our universe, and once we realize this, we can access this deeper reality as our own personal reality, a state Yeshua described as the kingdom of heaven. Yet our modern Christian societies insist on this separation as the only key to our salvation, which they claim can only happen after we die. Until we can overcome this ancient delusion, we will continue to be powerless slaves, suffering the consequences of our ignorance. The section Behavioral Psychology describes various ways that weak, spiritually undeveloped minds can and are being manipulated. A mind built on spiritually flimsy premises is similar to the controls of a robot, and those without the ability to control their own minds are easily manipulated by the plethora of control mechanisms which have evolved over the past century. A docile, easily manipulated society is a weak, vulnerable society, unable to exert much influence over its destiny. A section on Christian politics describes the American right and the pernicious influence Christianity has upon it. It is followed by a section on the tax-exempt status of the church and its resultant consequences. A final section entitled The Good Christian acknowledges many great Christians of the past and present, but explains how Christianity is a selfish religion which focuses on an individual's personal salvation after death based solely on faith in the Romans' corrupted book. My apologies to any Christians who regard this as an attack on their sacred beliefs. It is presented in the hope that it might liberate some from the clutches of a fraudulent, exploitative doctrine, thus freeing them to engage in more fruitful, genuine spiritual activities. If you truly love Jesus, you should at least consider alternative interpretations of his life, achievements, and their incredible significance. In the 21st century, we have new information and more advanced methods of analysis than existed during the reign of the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great. Part 5. The Three Jewels. This explains the core teachings of the Buddha. Nobody accused the Buddha of being a god, and he never claimed any form of personal divinity. His name was Siddhartha Gautama, and he lived in India approximately 500 years before the birth of Yeshua. His religion is up there with those of the so-called gods, based entirely on the profound wisdom he was able to impart after he attained supreme enlightenment. He achieved this exalted state by himself, sitting under a tree. What he revealed was highly counterintuitive and still remains radical to this day. The three jewels are the Buddha himself, the Dharma, or what he presented about the nature of reality, and the Sangha, or the vast worldwide community of adherents, otherwise known as Buddhists. This part provides a summary of Buddhism, which is not technically a religion because it doesn't stipulate the worship of any god or gods, but actually denies the existence of an eternal creator god. Instead, it is an advanced system of sophisticated mind training techniques, the goal of which is liberation from the mundane world into a state known as nirvana, or what Yeshua referred to as the kingdom of heaven. Part 6. Appendices. Appendix 1. God describes the concept of deity as defined by Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism. Appendix 2. Satan presents the origins and significance of the devil or Satan. Appendix 3. Heaven and Hell, the proverbial carrot and stick used by Christianity to ensure unwavering faith in the absurdities presented in their holy Bible. Appendix 4. Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. These are the cornerstones of Christian indoctrination, deployed into the minds of children before they are old enough to form rational opinions. They are eventually revealed to be illusory fabrications, unlike the requisite belief in God and Jesus. Appendix 5. Miracles, or feats of magic that Christians believe are the result of divine intervention, suspending the otherwise immutable laws of nature. The Bible is full of them, and they form the basis of the belief that Yeshua was not just another human being, but was an entirely new form of being, the only begotten Son of God. Appendix 6. Sin. The Ten Commandments completely ignore the 7 deadly sins preached by Christianity. Sin is evil or ignorant behavior that offends God, although it can be forgiven after confession and repentance. Christianity is based on the premise that sins can be washed away with impunity and have no ultimate consequences. Sin is not the criteria for being cast down into hell. That is solely determined by faith in the Word of God as presented exclusively in the Bible. Appendix 7. The Gospel of Thomas. An analysis of the mental technology behind these 114 sayings of the Master Yeshua, which were faithfully recorded by his son Judah. It includes a list of every saying that mentions the kingdom of heaven. Hell is not mentioned in either of the Gospels of Thomas or Philip. Appendix 8. The Shroud of Turin. This delves into the history and modern scientific analysis of this authentic relic. Appendix 9. The Spear of Longinus. This busts the myth of the latent powers of evil that both Napoleon and Hitler attributed to this fraudulent object. It is claimed to be the actual spear used by the centurion Gaius Longinus to pierce the side of Jesus as he was dying on the cross. Carbon dating has conclusively refuted this spurious claim. Appendix 10. What is Christ? This explains the common terminology used to describe Yeshua. Appendix 11. Racism and sexism goes deeply into the biblical origins of and justifications for these two symptoms of undeveloped minds. Appendix 12. Mind. This final appendix lands the plane. It contains an enunciation of what mind is based on the direct experiences of Sogyal Rinpoche as presented in the spiritual classic, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. Mind is the fundamental prima materia of the universe, and we are all an integral part of it. It is the source of all consciousness, the full realization of which is the purpose of life. Om, Ah, Hum.